Good morning, RockFish Church. Anderson Creek, how is everyone this morning? For those of you that I haven't had the opportunity to meet, my name is Clay Davis. I'm part of the communication team here at RockFish Church. I'm honored to be with you this morning. I'm going to go quickly today. Thank you. No, seriously, I am. I know we laugh because, see, I got a lot of talking to about last time. But there's a lot here. There's a lot to cover, so we're going to kind of jump into things. We're in week 4 of our 30 Pieces of Silver series. Amen. We started out talking about Judas and the price he was willing to accept to betray Jesus. And we looked at how we might be like Judas in some ways and some of the things that we would trade Jesus for. And we talked about power and control, money, pride, pleasure, acceptance. That was in week 1. Week 2, we talked about our desire for comfort and how we would be willing to trade Jesus for comfort. But really all of these things, and in week 3, did Julio not do a fantastic job last week for you, those of you that are here? Just laying out the gospel. On Easter, talking about our need, why Jesus had to come, the fact that he did, and what it means for us. And so that brings us to today. And today we're going to kind of talk about the one issue that all these others kind of stem from. And it's just the fact that we struggle to give up control and are often willing to trade Jesus for it. Now, let me be very clear from the beginning. I have struggled with control and the need for control more in the last 8 weeks than I ever have in my life. So as I'm going through all of this up here, just for transparency, I'm not sitting here like I've got it all figured out and I've got it all together. This is still a work in progress for me. I don't like to be in a vehicle unless I'm in control of the vehicle. Little things. Just it's really been showing up in my life. And this is before I even looked at what the message was going to be on today. And so it's funny how God does that sometimes. He says, hey, you're struggling with this, so let me put you up in front of people to talk about it and see how that works for you. So now, you all know I'm a school teacher, right? So we got to have a little test this morning. We got a pop quiz. So we're going to go, we're going to go through a few things, ways we might determine to what degree we have control issues. Now, notice I didn't say if we have control issues or not, okay? It's to what degree we have control issues. And understand, just because you're not having control issues or you don't feel like you're having them right now today doesn't mean you won't have them tomorrow or next week. It's not like these things become set in stone. Our situations may affect how much our need for control affects our lives. And some of us, we don't really have much of an issue with control, and some of us are absolute control freaks. and we acknowledge that. And I would have never considered myself that much of a control freak until recently. And it just seems like more and more I want that control. So we're going to go through, there are 11 things real quick. I'm going to go through these quick so we can get to the heart of the message. But these are ways you can help evaluate yourself. Do you have these? Do these things show up in your life? Number 1, everything must happen according to your schedule. Delegating tasks makes you uneasy. I'm sorry, don't raise your hands. And don't be throwing elbows out there either. I don't need to see all that. You lash out at minor inconveniences. You're extremely critical. I never realized how much being critical of others is a sign of your need or want to have control. You must know every detail. You're a workaholic and love it. That's me again. You cannot work as a team. You must see it to believe it. You want to be a perfectionist in everything you do. You can't take criticism, and you don't trust people. How we feeling? I stepped on anybody's toes yet besides my own? I know I have, because we all deal with those things. And some of them, as I was going through this, I didn't even realize those were symptoms of control issues. So I stopped and thought about it. The criticism thing. Usually we're being critical of others. Why? Because we would have done it differently. See what I mean? So we have an episode from Jesus' life where Jesus, because he was 100% man and 100% God, he demonstrates this how we deal with this issue of control. If you have your Bibles, turn to Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be in verses 36 through 46 for this main part of the passage. And this is Jesus. He's already had the what we know as the Last Supper. They've gone out and they've come to the Garden of Gethsemane. This is the place where Jesus will be betrayed, where the guards will show up and events will unfold. And we're just going to go through this. I wouldn't normally do this, read 10 verses, but I think it's important because there's a progression in all of this that we need to see. There's some things we can pull out that if I just summarize it, you're going to miss the progression. So verse 36, it starts out, "Then Jesus went with his disciples to a place called Gethsemane, and he said to them, sit here while I go over there and pray. He took Peter and the 2 sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. Then he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." The first thing we have to realize and recognize and this is Jesus. Remember, we're supposed to follow his example, right? And this one hit me yesterday. I mean, it hit me hard. In order to fully submit control, there were some that had to be left behind. I'll say that again. In order to fully submit control, there were some that had to be left behind. Jesus shows up at the garden with his disciples, and he says, y'all sit over here while I go and pray. But then he said, you 3 come with me. There were some that had to be left behind. Not everybody is going to understand. Not everybody is going to support you giving control, you submitting yourself to God, because not everything God asks you to do is going to make sense in the natural. So we go to verse 39. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me, yet not as I will, but as you will. Then he returned to his disciples and found them sleeping. Couldn't you men keep watch with me for 1 hour? He asked Peter. That's significant. He asked Peter that. Watch and pray so that you will not fall into temptation. The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Understand, Jesus is not referring to Peter falling into temptation to deny him. Jesus has already told Peter, you are going to deny me. Okay? This is a different temptation Jesus is talking about. Jesus is telling Peter, you need to watch and pray so that you don't fall into the temptation to attempt to control the situation. We'll see that in a minute when some things happen and Peter decides to jump up and try and take control. We're in verse 42 now. He went away a second time and prayed, my Father, if it is not possible for this cup to be taken away unless I drink it, may your will be done. Did you catch that? Did you notice the difference in the first prayer and the second prayer? We'll come back to that in a minute. 43, when he came back, he again found them sleeping because their eyes were heavy. So he left them and went away once more and prayed the third time, saying the same thing. Then he returned to the disciples and said to them, are you still sleeping and resting? Look, the hour has come, and the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. Here comes my betrayer. he comes to the point where he says, okay, guys, wake up. Let's go face what is ahead of me. And then we see the passage is followed by the betrayal of Judas. And then we see in verse 50 and 51, Jesus replied. Jesus is now talking to Judas and those that came with him. Do what you came for, friend. Then the men stepped forward and seized Jesus and arrested him. With that, one of Jesus' companions reached for his sword and drew it out and struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his ear. Now, Matthew's being nice here in not naming names, but we know from other accounts that this was Peter. Yep. Peter jumped up and said, let me show you something, God. I got this. I'm going to take control of this situation. And he pulls his sword. I don't know what he thought he was going to do with his sword, because I can't believe he was trying to cut the guy's ear off. Right? And I can just see Jesus just shaking his head. Like, Peter, you still don't get it. You're not in control. Some things have to happen outside of your control, outside of your comfort, outside of the way you hoped and expected things to happen. Things have to happen that way, because what does Jesus do? He picks up the guy's ear and puts it back on. Now, I'm still blown away that the temple guard and all those had what it took to continue with arresting Jesus at that point after what they just saw. I mean, can you imagine being there, seeing someone's ear cut off and seeing somebody pick it up and just put it back on like it was, and all of a sudden there's no evidence that it was ever gone, ever cut off. And they went on with it. See, this story with Jesus and with Peter, it reveals something to us about humanity and the human condition. It's that there is a human desire for control, but we also don't want to be controlled. Peter wanted to control the situation, and he didn't want Jesus taken away out of his control. He didn't want the control to be held by someone else. Because when Jesus was arrested, in Peter's mind, understand the culture and the time, these were the Jewish authorities. This was the legal system. This was the government in the Jewish lands at the time. It was, you didn't have separation of church and state. The government was held by Rome, but they let the Jews deal with themselves pretty much. As long as the high priest could keep everyone under control, he could do whatever he wanted. So in Peter's mind, if they gain control, the situation's now completely changed. So we have this need. So we can imagine how this affects our relationship with God. There's a part of the human condition is I want to be in control. Because if I'm in control, then I get to determine what happens. I get to determine what the outcome is. Or at the very least, I can protect myself, right? If I'm in control, then nothing hurts me that I don't allow. Nothing gets to me that I don't allow. Nothing bad can happen to me without my knowledge. And the problem with that is I was blown away. There's a statement or a verse that's actually repeated word for word in the book of Proverbs. It's this, there is a path before each person that seems right, but it ends in death. That exact wording appears twice in the book of Proverbs. Now we know from the study of ancient literature that any time a word is repeated, that's significant. A whole sentence, a whole statement, that is profound. That is something we have to pay attention to. And that gets at our issue with this human desire to have control. Is there's a path that seems right to us. See, it seemed right to Peter to draw his sword and challenge the temple guard because Jesus was the Messiah. He was going to set up and establish his kingdom. How does a king establish a kingdom from the prison or from the grave because they already knew that they had desired to kill Jesus. This is Peter's thinking. This is that human condition. I can't allow this bad to happen because if I allow this bad to happen, it thwarts God's plan. We have to remember that we have a God that loves us. He loves us very much. As a matter of fact, He loves us so much that He gave us free will. He gave us the option to choose. Problem is we don't like the choices that some people make. And I've never heard anybody ask the question, I just don't understand why God didn't keep me from doing fill in the blank. Why God didn't stop me from making that mistake. But we always ask the question, why did God allow that person to do that bad thing to someone else? See, we're perfectly okay with God treating someone else like a robot, but we don't want Him to treat us that way. He loves us so much that He doesn't. He gives us free choice. He's not going to force us into anything. We see that even with Jesus. Jesus was fully man. He was fully God. Jesus was struggling in the garden because Jesus knew exactly what was going to happen. At this point, there was no doubt. Jesus knew He was going to be crucified. Having been in the time He was familiar with crucifixion. Crucifixions were public. It's not like the death penalty here in the United States where it's very private. The crucifixions took place on a hill outside of the city gates, and they took place up on a hill so that the maximum number of people could see and hear the brutality of the crucifixion. Jesus knew what He was going to have to go through. But we saw that progression. He first said, if it's possible, let this cup pass from me. Right? That left open the option. Then He's followed it up with, not my will, but your will be done. But then the second time He said, if it's not possible for this cup to pass without me drinking it, then let your will be done. Basically, Jesus said, okay, I get it. There's no way this is going to go without me having to walk this path. So if that's the case, then let your will be done. We have trouble giving control when we don't know what the outcome's going to be. There's a possibility of a bad outcome. And we want to hang on or take control, don't we? But Jesus knew there was going to be I won't say a bad outcome, because Jesus knew He was going to He was going to come back. He knew how the story would end. But He also knew exactly what He was going to have to go through to get to that point. That's what makes this example so significant. Jesus knew the things He was going to have to suffer. And if He was fully man and He has understood and experienced the things we have, then He knew what pain was. He understood this desire to not have to go through it. None of us want to go through something like that just because. We'd all be looking for an easier way. Yet He was willing to say, nevertheless, your will be done. See, Jesus understood this from Isaiah. It says, for just as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts higher than your thoughts. I remember a couple of years ago, we had to travel. We had to fly back to Arkansas for a death of a family member. And I remember a couple of different things, but I remember as we were flying back, and I think we were flying into Charlotte, and I could look out the window, It was night, so I had a great view. You could see the lights. You could see the city as we were coming in. You could see the details. And God just impressed on me that that's the way it works. See, we view things from the street level, right? So when I go out here and I take a left out of the parking lot, my view is limited, right? I can only see what's right there in front of me. But God is looking. His view is like that of looking down from the airplane. He sees not just what's right in front of us. He sees the whole path. And he sees that this road ends. There's what appears to be a dead end to this road, right? But he also sees that just around the corner, there's the situation changes. And then there's another turn, and before you know it, it's easy, smooth sailing. See, he sees that because he's got that view. And all he's asking us to do is trust him. Now, we also need to know this. Loving God does not always mean that we want to face what God calls us to face. It does mean that we choose to face it anyways. You know, we've appear to be coming out of the pandemic known as COVID, depending on who you listen to. I'm fairly certain that none of us would choose to face something like that again if we had a choice, right? Pastors had to make hard decisions. Some of them made good decisions, some of them made bad decisions. Same with individuals. We had to face it anyway. We had to make hard decisions. What do we do? How do we do it? See, Jesus has told his disciples, you're going to face this. But then this is the moment when your faith has to really rise. You have to really stand on that faith. See, we forget sometimes that it is the Christian faith. Faith, it's not the Christian religion, it's a Christian faith, because you're never going to have all the answers on this side. You're never going to know every detail on this side. And if we're just really honest, if we get honest with ourselves about how much control we really have, it's not much. In the grand scheme of things, I can control everything I think I can control. And it's still insignificant to the big picture. Because really all I can control is me. I can't control anybody else. You know, I can pay the light bill, but I can't control whether electricity comes in or not, because things happen. You know, I can't control that somebody might hit a pole and knock a pole down and take lines down. You know, we've lost power for days because of a hurricane, and it wasn't even an issue in our area. You know, it was transmission lines coming from further north that were taken down. We couldn't control that. We did everything we could to make sure we were prepared and our power wouldn't go out, right? We don't have much that we can control. We still have to face life. We still have to face situations. Several years ago, God called me to transition in my full-time job and to be a school teacher. God opened the door, but when God called me to do that and he opened the door and said, this is what I want you to do, it was almost a 50% pay cut. Hey, y'all, we were not living on just half of my income. We were like everybody else. Money came in, money went out. Money came in, a little bit went over here in the savings account, but most of it went back out. That's how we were. And God said, do this. And we sat down because my wife is very smart and very good with figures, and you know, she can figure out a way to make it work, and we can make this work. But we sat down, and guess what? We couldn't make it work. We couldn't pay our bills. But God said, this is what you're supposed to do. I wasn't out of a job looking for a job. I had a good job. I had a good job with good benefits, but God said, this is the move. That was almost 3 years ago. Almost 3 years ago. God said, take this job. I'm going, God, how am I going to pay my bills? We finally prayed about it, and we came to the conclusion, we don't have any choice, but we'll just do what God said. I can stand before you today and say we are debt-free. Amen. Now, we had a mortgage, okay? It doesn't add up. If we had done what we could do, if we had based the decision on what we could control, we'd still be making that house payment. I didn't want to face a 50% pay cut. Nobody does. But see, that's what God does. He says, face it anyways. Just like with this situation. When Jesus is arrested, he wants his disciples to face. He's already told them what's going to happen. I'm going to be arrested. You're going to be scattered. But this is what you have to face. I want you to face it. And they didn't want to do it, but they had to. See, sometimes we try to avoid facing something, and God will put it right in our face anyhow. Won't he? You say, I don't want to do that, I'm going to do this, and God says, okay, that's cute. Let me know how it works for you. Maybe he doesn't talk to you that way. God talks to me that way because that's how I understand it, right? I heard one preacher talking about one time he went to do something, and God said, are you sure you want to go down that road? Because if you do, you're going alone. You know, it got his attention. Sometimes God lets us do some stuff. He lets us try to take it. He let Peter cut the guy's ear off, right? He didn't stop Peter when Peter pulled his sword. He didn't tell Peter, you leave your sword in the upper room when we go to the garden. He let it happen, and then he corrected the situation. Peter still had to face what God was calling him to face. So I have to wonder if not in Peter's mind, if he prevents Jesus from being arrested, then he doesn't have to worry about denying him. I mean, think about it. Jesus said, you'll deny me. Well, if he doesn't get arrested, as long as I'm right there with him, there's no opportunity to have to deny him. But anyhow, the key to it all is what Jesus said in Matthew 26:39. Not as I will, but as you will. Jesus said this facing what was to come: 6 trials, beatings, crucifixion. I think worse than the physical of the crucifixion was the moment that the sky grew dark and Jesus said, my God, why have you forsaken me? When the Father had to turn his back on the Son. See, Jesus knew that was coming. God can't look on sin. Jesus was taking the sin of the whole world, past and future. How do I know that Jesus took on future sin? Well, if he didn't, we're all in trouble. Plain and simple. So he knew that was coming. He was going to spend 3 days doing what he did. And then he was going to have to unwrap himself because his body had been wrapped and prepared for burial. This is what he was going to have to go through. And see, from man's perspective, I pick on Peter because you know Peter's my favorite. From Peter's perspective, it was over. It was done at this point. Jesus gets arrested, it's over. Jesus got arrested. He went through everything. And now we find Peter. Have to go to John 21 to find what Peter does. Peter's even seen Jesus since he was raised from the dead, right? But Peter goes back to his default. Yes, sir. Peter goes back to fishing. Now, Peter's supposed to be a fisher of men, right? And we find Peter fishing for fish and not doing very well. They fished all night. Peter got the guys. He said, I'm going to fish. And there were several of them that said there's like Peter, Thomas, Nathaniel, James and John, and 2 other disciples that don't even get named here. And when Peter said, I'm going fishing, they said, all right, we'll go with you. If you're going back to what worked before, I'll go back to what worked before. There were some lean times when I took this job with 50% pay cut. There were some times that we looked at it and I had to pick up the phone and say, hey, I need a little more time to pay this bill. Right? But I didn't go back. The key is if we hit those moments, don't go back. What did the children of Israel want to do when things got tough in the desert? They wanted to go back. Peter went back. Now he's fishing. But he's not having any luck. He's not doing any good. It didn't work for him. Why did it not work for him? Because that's not what God had called him to do. Amen. See, we seem to forget that if we're in control and we're outside of God's will, it's not going to work. Amen. Oh, it may work from the standpoint of you may be making plenty of money, but you're not enjoying any of it. You may have all the stuff that you think you want, and none of it brings you peace. It may be that others look at you and go, man, I wish I had your life. And you're thinking, man, I wish you had my life too. We forget. If his ways are higher, and Jesus goes on to show them that his ways are higher. Because in John 21, in verses 4 through 7, it's early in the morning now. These guys been out fishing all night. All night. Now, I don't know about y'all. I would say I like to fish, but that wouldn't actually be an honest statement. I like to catch fish, okay? So I'm just being real with you. I'm thinking about how do you be out all night and you hadn't caught anything and you're still trying. And this fishing was work. Remember, they didn't have fishing poles. They were fishing with these huge big nets. And then Jesus shows up. And they don't know it's Jesus, but Jesus shows up and says, now, cast your net on the other side. Do what you've been doing, but do it just a little bit different. And all of a sudden, they got more fish than they can handle. And Peter, being the control freak that he is, when he realizes it's Jesus, he forgets the fish. It says he puts on his outer garment and he jumps out the boat and runs to shore. Peter had spent all night working to do what? To fill the boat with fish. Because that was familiar. That's something he knew he could do. That provided security because the fish, it wasn't just fish for him to eat. It was fish for him to sell, right? So he could have some money. Spent all night doing that with no success. Jesus shows up and says, here, throw your nets over here. All of a sudden, everything Peter had been working for all night was right there. And he turned and ran to Jesus and left that all behind. Peter always tried to control the situation rather than understand and see God moving within the situation. When Jesus told him he was going to be crucified and it would rise again on the third day, Peter said, we would never let that happen. And Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. Peter's always trying to control the situation. They show up to arrest Jesus. Peter says, I'll put a stop to this. We have to see God working in the situation. No, that's not right. We have to trust that God is working in the situation. Because many times we're not going to see it. Not while we're in the midst of the situation, and sometimes we won't even know what God's purpose of it was while we're on this earth. That's just the reality of it. Quickly, 3 quick tips to let go of control, because this is where we have to get to. It's a struggle for all of us, but we have to get there. If there's a way that seems right to me, but it ends in death, if His ways are higher than mine and His thoughts are higher than mine, and I say if, but they are, we know they are because His Word tells us that, and His Word has been proven true over and over and over again. And I hope that you get to the point where you can say, like I can say, that the way I know this Word is true is because I've tested it and I've tried it and I've experienced it, and it's never failed me. I don't need science. I don't need archaeology. All that stuff's wonderful. I don't need any of that to convince me that His Word is true, because I know it's true. I've experienced it. First thing we have to do is we have to confess and surrender our need for control. The first step to solving any problem is what? Admitting that there's a problem. If we don't acknowledge it, we'll never get over it. Guys, that's simple. It's easy. We all deal with it to some degree or another, and if you're not dealing with it right now, you either have or you will. It will show up again. Secondly, seek God. See, if I were to ask you to give me control over all your money, you would probably say no because you don't know me that well, right? Right. But God's asked us to give Him control over all our money. It's easier to trust someone when you know someone, right? The Bible says we're to know those that work among us. It's the reason that you can't just show up and join the church today and go through starting point and finish starting point and immediately go to working in the children's ministry. Because we got to get to know you first. You got to be around for a little bit. We got to do a background check. Because we're going to get to know you to a point that all of a sudden now we can trust you. See, if we have to get to know God. We have to spend time in His Word. We have to test His Word. Try it out. Don't just read it. Do what it says. See how it works for you. I mean, sometimes we get, and it's easy to do, we get caught up in, okay, well, I read my Bible. I've got a reading plan that I can read through the whole Bible in a year, and so I got to sit down today and I've got to read. Oh, that's a lot to read. So I'm going to read through it. Okay, I read that, now I'm done for the day. But that's just the beginning. We pray, we talk to God, but do we listen? Because you can't do what He says if you're not listening for Him to tell you what to do. Pastor Tony always says we don't have decisions to make, we have directions to follow. That is a really profound statement. The problem is if you don't spend time on your face before God, listening, not just bombarding heaven with all of your needs and all of your family's needs and your friends' needs. I swear, we pray every night together before we go to bed, and sometimes it's like we'd be here all night if we just started listing off the needs of just the people we know. You know, the people are going through stuff. People are hurting, but that's fine. We are called to be intercessors. That should be a big part of our prayer life. We should spend more time praying for other people than we do ourselves. Really, that's according to what the Word says. But sometimes we got to shut our mouths and we got to listen. And so you can't usually do that, at 11:30 at night when you should have been in bed at 10 and you got to be up at 5 in the morning. That's probably not the best time to say, I'm going to set aside time. God, all right, now I'm going to be quiet. I'm going to listen, because now you're laying down in the bed and you're going to be asleep. If you're like me, it's hard to do that first thing in the morning, because it takes me a little while to get up and get going. Some of us need our first cup of coffee or our first round of a soft drink or whatever, we need a little time to get going. So now we have to carve out time, and we have to take time in the middle of the day. Maybe we have to turn the radio off in the car. We have to do something different if we really want to hear from Him. We have to seek Him. And then that brings us to the last one, which is simply trust God. I say it simply. I promise you, if you get to know him, if you test his word and try his word, you'll have no problem trusting him. Is it easy? No, I would never sit here and tell you it's easy, because God's going to call you out of your comfort zone. He's going to challenge you to do things that you would normally do. He's not going to call everybody to quit their job and take a 50% pay cut. That's what he called me to do. He's not going to call everyone to be a missionary to a foreign land. That's not what he's called me to do. He's called somebody else to do that. But he's going to call you to do something specific. And the reality of it is, if it doesn't scare you at least a little bit, it's probably not God. Because if it's something you can easily do on your own, you don't need to trust him. You don't need faith. I'm going to close with this. It's a quote by a man named Jim Elliott. And Jim Elliott actually lived out this quote. Jim Elliott was a missionary that back in 1956, I believe it was 1956 or 59, so forgive me if I don't have the date exactly right. He was one of 5 that were killed as they went to Ecuador. As they went to Ecuador to try to reach a tribe that had never been reached, an unreached people group. And it's an amazing story if you follow it all the way through, and they find out that it was his wife and his children. These men's wives and children were actually able to go in and reach this people group. It's an amazing story. I don't have time. There's a movie called End of the Spear. If you get a chance, if you have an opportunity to find it and watch it, that tells their story. It's an amazing movie. But Jim Elliott said this. He said, "He is no fool who gives what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." When we submit and we give Jesus Christ control, we are giving our lives that we cannot keep. Recent studies show that 1 out of every 1 person dies at some point. I mean, that's it. This life that we have here and now will come to an end. Some sooner than others, but we know that unless Jesus comes back, if he tarries long enough, everyone in this room will die. Sorry, not trying to be negative. That's just a fact. This life we have, we cannot keep. My house, my wonderful paid-for house, will be somebody else's someday, because I won't need it anymore. Whether that's Jesus coming back or me going there. I can't keep that stuff. Those cars that sit out of that parking lot, they'll eventually be rusting out in a salvage yard or scrapped out for the metal. At some point, it doesn't last. When we give Jesus control, he gives us those things that we can't lose. We gain eternal life. We gain peace. So you can't take my peace because you didn't give it to me. You can't take my joy because guess what? You're not the source of my joy. Happiness, my peace, my joy. Stand if you can. Again, all of this comes from a place of struggle, a place of something that I'm dealing with. So please, I know I said simply trust God. I wish it was just that simple. I wish we could say a prayer right now. I wish I could close out with a prayer and we could all walk away and just in complete and total trust and never have to deal with this again. Sometimes it's a moment by moment. It's not even take up your cross daily. It's like, I got to go back. God, okay, thank you, God. You got me through that last 5 minutes. I need you to get me through the next 5. God, we come to you this morning. God, we thank you so much, God, that we can trust you. God, that your word is true and that we can test your word, God. Yes, we take it on faith, but God, we can also try it out. We can test it and see that it works. God, we thank you that you have never failed us. God, we ask right now that you would open our eyes to see you working to understand that you're working, to look for how you're working in a given situation, God. God, even when the situation doesn't work out the way we thought it would or the way we wanted it to, God, that we would give up our need for control, our desire for control, that we would lay it down at your feet. God, that we would be able to say, like Jesus said in the garden, nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. God, that we could say like Mary said when the angel came to her, God, and facing all that she was, be it unto me according to your word. God, we want you. God, we want your will, your plan, your purpose above all else. God, we ask that your Spirit rests with each one of us, God, that you would just make yourself more real to us than you have ever been. God, we ask you to guide and direct us as we go from this place. God, that you would remind us that this is just a starting point. God, this is our charging station, God, so we can now go out into the world and we can carry your kingdom everywhere we go. It's in Jesus' mighty name we pray. Amen.